Hello, welcome to another video of code snippet, and this is basically part 2 of JWT authentication implementation. So in the part 1 of JWT authentication, we have seen how we can create authentication API and how we can authenticate username and password inside our controller and how to generate the JWT authentication token. So that first flow we have seen. Now your client have the authentication token. Now in the subsequent request in the get, post, delete or any other operation, let's say user wants to send that JWT token, then how we can authenticate that token and how we can validate that token and send back the response, right? That is something we are going to look into this video. So let's get started without wasting any time. So this is going to be a fun video. So sit back, relax and enjoy the show. Right, so let's quickly jump into the agenda of this particular video. So JWT authentication implementation. So before that, in the first part, we have seen recap on JWT flow and we have implemented the authentication API. After that, we have authenticated the user inside our controller, and after that, we have generated JWT token, right? So if you haven't seen that video, I will recommend go ahead and check it out because you will have better clarity of this particular video if you go through it. So let's get started over here. So let me go to canvas over here. So this is basically the authenticate flow that we have seen in the last video, right? To have a quick recap of it. So this will be a first request to get the JWT token from our server, right? So client will send the request and we are skipping this authenticate API from our filter chain. It will directly go to our authentication controller. By using this authentication manager, we will validate the username and password coming from our client. And we have implemented this JWT utility which have generate token method by using these libraries, right? So we have generated the token and our user have the token, right? Now the next thing over here, if we see this particular diagram, now this first flow we have seen, right? First flow we have seen. Now we are looking into this one. Now the next subsequent request which user will send, what we need to do now, user will send the bearer token, right? This particular JWT token which we have sent and user already have it. That particular token will be sent in authorization header. We need to extract, decode, verify and check the expiry, and after that we need to process the request, right? All those things we are going to look into this video. So here authentication does not comes into picture. This authenticate flow that we have in this Spring Security architecture will not come into picture because we have already authenticated all these things when we return the token, right? We have already authenticated by using this authentication manager, right? So our authentication controller already authenticated this user by using this authentication manager, then this provider and user detail service, right? So all those things are already done once, right? That's why we don't want to do it again. That's why we return JWT token to client, right? So that client can use that to send subsequent requests, right? So now all these things are not needed because our client already have token. Now let me go over here to this diagram. Now we are skipping this authentication manager, provider and user details because not needed, right? And we also don't need basic authentication filter now, right? Because if you are sending any other request, this filter will come into picture and this guy will start intercepting your request and start validating. We don't really want that, so we will remove this guy now, right? So once we remove this, which one will come into picture? If you know, by default Spring Security uses username and password authentication filter, right? So that will be there by default, right? But just before that, what we need to do, we need to add our own authentication filter for JWT. What we'll do, we'll create a JWT authentication filter. We need to add our JWT authentication filter. That also we'll need to create before our username and password authentication filter, right? Because if your username and password authentication filter comes first, then this guy will start again validating this request and say, dude, you don't have a valid username and password, right? That is why we should add this JWT authentication filter before your username and password filter, right? Now what this filter will do? Now this filter will not call your authentication manager to validate all these things, right? All these things, authentication manager, provider and user detail service will not come into picture now because our request is already authenticated. What we need to do, we need to just check the token that we are getting from the user, right? And that will be done inside our JWT authentication filter. So let me minimize all these things and I will just remove this link because we don't want to do this anymore. Now what this JWT authentication filter will do, this guy will talk to our JWT utility again, right? So we have created JWT utility, right? So if you remember, we have created this particular JWT utility, right? JWT utility we have created. which basically talks to our libraries, right? And now what our JWT filter will do, this guy will directly talk to our JWT utility, right? And this utility will again have all the methods related to validating your JWT authentication token, right? Once this guy validates it, once this token is valid, what this guy will do, what our authentication will do, this guy will directly call your Spring context holder and add this particular principal object to it. That, okay dude, this particular user is verified and I'm adding this to security context. The principal object is added over here. Now when the next filter comes into picture, username and password authentication filter, this filter will see that, okay dude, the principal object is already added into security context. So I don't need to validate it again. So it will just skip that. And your call will directly go to your controller. So that is basically the flow of your subsequent request. So all these things will not come into picture over here. Rather, we'll just use this and we'll just set the object directly. So this filter is something which is not provided by Spring. We need to implement it on our own, right? So this entire part of authentication is skipped over here and we will directly go to the respective controller, right? So again, to reiterate, we will add a JWT authentication filter right before your username and password authentication filter. Now this JWT authentication filter will make use of this JWT utility, which will make use of this JWT library, and here we need to implement the functions related to validating this JWT token that is coming, right? And after that, this guy will add the principal object inside this security context holder. So just these two things we need to implement and all these things will be done, right? And this is basically not needed, right? So this is the existing implementation that we have seen, but those things are needed in the first flow when it comes to authenticate, right? And we have already seen that. If I go to code, if you see over here, we have created this auth controller, right? This is basically the controller which have Authenticate API to generate a token. And what this guy will do, this guy will first authenticate by using authentication manager, generate a token. And this is basically the JWT util that we are talking about, right? JWT util. This is basically the utility that we have implemented in the last video only. So if you see over here, this only have one method, generate token. Now validate token is something we need to add over here basically. Now this will just generate the token and send back to user. So if you see over here, if I send this request, then we are getting this particular token. So until this point, we have seen in the last video. So if you see here in the security config, we are just permitting this Authenticate API, right? Now what is the first thing that we need to do, right? First thing, we need to remove this basic authentication filter. So what we have done, we have implemented this particular HTTP basic in order to do that, right? So let me just remove. I will just remove and add a semicolon over here, right? So that removes our basic authentication guy, right? Next thing we need to do is we need to implement what we need to implement, JWT authentication filter we need to implement, right? And we need to add it before username and password authentication filter. Now in order to add it into your filter chain, we need to first create it, right? So let's implement our filter. So what I will do, I have created this filter package, and here inside that I will just say new class, and let's say JWT authentication or auth filter, right? JWT auth filter. Let's add it and let's convert this guy to component as well. This is going to be a Spring Bean, and let's extend this by using once per request filter, right? So this guy is basically a filter which comes into picture only once for each request, right? And we are extending our filter class with this guy so that this will be converted to a filter. If you go inside it, it is basically a filter based class that aims to guarantee a single execution per request on a servlet container, right? And it has a do filter internal method which takes HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response as an argument, right? What we need to do, we need to implement that method. So if I click on implement that method, it will give us that particular method, right? So this is basically overridden method which have your request, which have your response, and you have filter chain. Now this particular method you have you will have in every filter, right? So here we are creating a custom filter, extending once per request filter. Here also we need to add this particular method, right? So what this particular method will do, we need to do 2-3 things over here. First thing we need to do is we need to validate our JWT token. In order to validate that, we need to first extract it from the request, right? Let's write some logic to extract the token from the request, right? So basically this filter we are going to add just before our basic authentication filter. So let's say first request will come to your JWT authentication filter. So what we will do, from the request, we will extract the JWT token, right? So we need to extract it from the request, right? So now where do we exactly add it? So if I go to this particular API, so now this is a get API, and this is basically will come into picture when we do authentication. So if I select bearer token from here, then this guy will have some random token, and if you go to header, then that token will be added inside your authorization header, right? Authorization header as a bearer token, right? Here what we need to do, we need to get it from the request dot get header, right? So first we will get header and we'll pass the name of the header, authorization, right? Is the spelling correct? No, it is not. So authorization, right? And we will just get it in a string, right? So we have this authorization header now, or just call it as a auth header, right? Whatever we have inside our auth header will be here now, right? Now what we need to do, we need to extract the token from here. So if you see over here, it comes in this format. It will be like bearer space and then you will have your token, right? So we need to extract it. Now how do we do that? Let's first validate if it is there. If it is not empty, like some people will not pass it, right? So first we will check if auth header is not equal to null, right? If it is not equal to null, and auth header also starts with bearer, right? So we can check that as well. What I will say, auth header dot starts with, and I will just add bearer over here, bearer, right? And you can add space as well because there will be a space, right? If these two conditions are passing, then what we will do, we'll just extract the token. How do we do that? We will say auth header dot, here if you see, the token will be after bearer, right? So bearer will be like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 places, 6 characters in bearer and 1 space. After 7 characters it will be there, right? So what we will do, we'll just say auth header dot substring, not starts with, we'll just say substring substring, and we will just pass 7 over here, right? The beginning index will be 7, right? The token's beginning index will be 7, and we will just grab it in a variable, let's say token, right? And probably we need to define it outside this particular if case because it will not be accessible anywhere else. What I will do, I'll just add it over here and I will just remove it, and I will just initialize this guy to null. Now we have the token, right? Now what else we need? Now let me just add a couple of to-dos over here. So first to-do is basically we need to validate this token, and second thing we need to do is second to-do we have is to set this to context. If the token is validated, then we need to set it to context, right? Now in order to validate this token, we will need user details, right? And we need to validate our token by using user details as well. What is the user detail inside this token and what is the user detail we have inside our database, right? So what we can do, we can extract the username. We can extract the username from this particular user detail repository, right? Find by username. We have created custom detail service as well. And here we need a username to extract the user. Now how we are going to get the username from this filter, right? How we are going to get the username? So we have a token here, right? So we need to extract username from this token, right? How we can do that? We can extract username by using a method. So what we can do, we can add a new method inside this guy. So let's say public, let's say it is string because your username will be string, and let's say get username, or rather extract username from token would be a better name. Extract username, let's say extract username, and it will just get the token, right? It will just get a string token, and from that token we need to extract, right? So here first thing we need to do is we need to extract all the information from this token, right? So again we have made use of this JWT to create the token. Now we can do reverse thing, right? We can extract information from this token by using again this same JWT guy. Now this time we will make use of parse builder. So there is method called as parse builder. What this guy will do, so here first thing we will do, we will set the signing key. That is the same key we will set over here, right? Same key that we have generated. We already have that key, right? So we have created this particular key in the last video. So same key we will use over here. So first we will set the signing key, that this is my signing key, and by using this signing key you can validate the JWT token and extract the details, right? And after that we will just build it. And after building, what we need to do, we need to extract everything, right? Extract extract everything. In order to do that, we can make use of parse claim JWT, and this will accept our token. That means parse everything from token. Parse claims mean parse everything from token. So this guy will parse everything. And if you see over here, what we can do over here, after parsing, you can just get the body of it, right? You can just get the body of it and you can collect it in a variable, right? Now you have a body. Now let's say you have a body. Now what we will do by using this body, what you can do, you can just say get. There should be get method or get username, or not username. Basically there should be get subject method, right? Get subject from this body, and we will just return that subject. Because if you see, while adding, we have added username as subject, right? So we want username, so we'll get it from subject. So now what we will do, we'll just call this method there inside our filter. Here what we will do, we'll just add this particular JWT. So we need to first inject it, I believe, right? So here we need to inject that guy first. So JWT util. So this JWT util I'm injecting over here, and I will just say auto wired. So that is there. Now I will say JWT util dot extract username, and what I will do, I will just pass token basically, right? So token I am passing over here, and this guy should return us a string. A string will be now our username. Again, this guy will not be accessible outside. So what I will do, I will just create it over here. String username, and again I will set it to null. So now we have extracted token and username from here, right? Again, we need a semicolon over here, otherwise this guy will cry. So now we have token, we have username, right? Right. So what we will do now we want to validate the token, right? We want to validate the token. Before that, what we will do, we will just check if this username that we are getting is not equal to null, right? Just a safety check, not equal to null, right? Once it is not equal to null, we will proceed. And another thing we will check, that if I go back over here to our diagram, we want to set it to security context inside security context holder. So first I will check if that guy is null and nothing is there, right? So first we will check that your principal object inside your security context holder is null. What we can do for that, we can just say security context holder. There we go, security context holder dot get context, and inside that, let's say we have get authentication. So let's check if this authentication is null, right? So we want to set it so it should be null in the first place, right? Now we want to validate the token, right? We want to validate the token now. Now when we extract the username from this guy, this particular JWT's parse builder, we are setting this particular signing key, right? And once we parse that particular token, if this particular signing key will not match, this guy will throw error that you have an invalid token, right? So our token verification is already done in one way, right? When we are fetching this username, right? But we want to do extra verification that the username that is present inside a token is already present inside my database, right? So in order to do that, what we can do, we can fetch user by using username, right? So we have this username. What we can do, we can make use of this custom user detail service and fetch the username. So what I will do, I will just inject that custom user detail service, and what I will do, I will just auto wire this guy. I will say auto wired, and here what I will do, custom user detail service dot load by username, and we will just pass the username over here, and this guy will return us the respective user details, right? So we have got the user details over here. Now what we will do, we will just validate the token, right? So what I will do, I will just add a validate token method, right? So in this particular JWT util, I will just add a validate token, and we will just pass this username, and we will also pass this user detail that we have extracted, right? And this method is not implemented there. Let's create a method. So there we go, we have this method now. Now here we will do two things. First thing we will do is check if username is same as username in user details. And second thing we will do over here, that we will check if the token that we have is not expired. So these two things we need to do over here, right? So let's do first thing real quick. But guess what? We don't have token over here. Other what we can do, let me just add a token over here as well. So what I will do, I will just say string and token, right? What I will do over here, we have username, we have user detail, and we have token as well. And validate token can be a boolean, so we'll just return a simple true false. So what we will do first thing, so what we can do, we can validate, right? So we can validate that username is coming, and that is basically equals to user details dot get username. And second thing we want to check is that if a token is expired, so we'll just add a new method. Let's say is token expired, right? So let me just implement this particular method real quick. So first we need to check if the token is not expired, right? How we can check that? We can just get the expiration from this body. So what I will do, I'll just extract this method instead of adding it over here again. We'll extract this into a method extract, and I will extract in a method, and I will say extract claims. This guy will return us the claims. And instead of doing all this, what I will do now, I will just add it over here, extract claims, and I will just return the subject in this case. So small function, right? So here also what we can do, we can just say extract claims. We'll pass token over here, and we will say get expiration, and we will just check if this expiration is before current time, right? It should be before current time, right? And this will again return as the boolean. So I will just return boolean from here, and from here we can just return this particular result of this particular statement, right? So that's it. Now we are validated. Now we have validated the token. This will just return true if this username is matching and the token is not expired. It should be not expired ideally, right? Token should not be expired. Now we will go back to authentication filter, and we will say validate token. Token we need to pass token as well, right? So we have validated this token now. And now if this particular statement is true, if the token is validated, so I will just add this in a if case only. And if the token is validated, then what we want to do, we want to add it. Where do we want to add it? We want to add it to this particular security context, right? And in order to add that, we need to create this particular object, right? So how we can create that? We can create that by using new. There should be a username and password token ideally. Let me just search username password authentication token, right? And here we will first pass the user details. So we will first set the user details. Principal means our user details, right? So first thing it will take is principal. Second thing it is taking is basically your credential. So I don't have any credential over here, so I will just say null. And third thing it wants is, what is the third thing it wants? Authorities, right? So we can extract that by using user details service, right? User details dot get authorities, right? So if you see over here, user detail will have authorities. So this user that we have created will implement user details, and it will have authorities, right? Get authorities function will be there, which will just return simple granted authority, which will have the role of this particular user, right? Now we have created this token. Let me just grab it in a variable. I will just say username and password authentication token, or just say auth token. So this token we have created to set inside our application context, right? So what we will do, we'll just set it in a security context holder. Security context holder dot get context dot set authentication, and we will just say auth token. Now here when we are adding these details, it will have all these details, right? User detail and user authorities, right? But what we can do, we can add few extra details over here in the auth token. So what I can say, auth token dot auth token, I can say set details, and we'll just create a new details object, right? New web authentication details source, right? So this is basically the implementation of your details object. And here what we will do, we'll just say build details, and inside build details we'll pass the request, right? Now why we are doing all these things? Because we want to set all the request related details to this particular object auth token, right? All the request related details, because this auth token only will have this user detail and user detail authorities, right? It won't have any details related to this request. By using this statement, we are setting it so that your context will have more information about this token and this particular principal object, right? So this may be important for auditing purpose later. So let's say we want to log the details about the request. So you can do that from your authentication object, which is present inside your security context, inside your context holder, right? So that is basically something which we can do, not really required, but you can do that, right? After that, what we will do, once all these things are completed, what we need to do, we need to just call the next filter, right? What we'll do, we'll just say filter chain dot do filter, and we'll just pass the request and response, right? So that the next filter in the filter chain will be called. So these are the things which we are doing over here, right? And that's all about your JWT authentication filter. Now this filter should do all these things for us, which we have implemented. What all things we have done? We first got the authentication header from authorization header. After that, we are checking if it is not null and checking if that is starting with bearer, right? If that is starting with bearer, we are just making use of substring and taking a token after 7th index, right? And after that, we are just extracting the username from this token by using this extract username. And here we have created an extract claims, which will extract the details from our token, right? By using this JWTS, we will provide the same signing key. It will check if it is correct and it will parse it, right? And here it will just return us the subject. So we got the username. So after that, we checked if that is not null, and we checked if the authentication object inside this context is null in the first place, right? After that, what we are doing, we are validating the token by using username, user detail, and token, right? So here we are checking if the username is equal to username which is coming from our database, and we are checking if the token is not expired, right? And inside token, we will again get these details, get this body by using this particular extract claims method, and we'll get expiration time, and we'll check if that is before the current time, right? So it should be before the current time, it should not be. So if it is before current time, that means your token is expired. So we are just checking if token is not expired. So it should be in future, right? Your expiry. So that will return the validate for us. And if this returns true, we are just creating object of auth token, username, password, authentication token, adding few request related details into it and setting it to your context, right? So that was the implementation of JWT filter. Again, very, very easy, right? We are not doing any complex stuff over here. Very, very simple stuff, right? We have added few things in our JWT utility by using this library. Now what we want to do, we want to add this JWT filter in a filter chain before username and password filter. How can we do that? Let's go back to security config. We can say http.add filter before. Which filter we want to add? We want to add JWT filter. So that particular JWT filter, I need to auto wire over here first, right? JWT AuthFilter. I will just auto wire it. That means I will just inject it by using auto wired, and I will just say JWT authentication filter before I want to add it before username and password authentication filter. Username password authentication filter dot class. That's it, right? Now I have added it before username and password authentication filter. Now our new filter is basically added inside our filter chain, right? Now I think we have everything, right? We have everything basically. So let's try to run this code, right? So let me just quickly rerun this particular code. Let's see what happens. So that is up. So what we will do now, let me just go over here and get a new token. So we will just get this particular token. Now if you see over here and try to send the request with basic authentication, then it may not work. It will not work basically. You will get an error. Now what we'll do, we'll just send a bearer token. Now here I have pasted the token, and if I send it, we are getting some 403. Why we are getting that? We are getting unsupported JWT exception at JWT util 35, right? Okay, so this should not be JWT. Ideally it should be JWS method, right? To extract the details, so parse the claims by using JWS. It should not be JWT. Let me stop and rerun. Now it should ideally work. Now if I go back and send the request, then we are getting the respective output, right? Now what we can do, let's have a quick debug session. It is running in debugging mode already. So what I will do, I will go to our JWT filter first and add a debug point over here. From there we can proceed, right? Now let me send it. Now if you see over here, we are extracting the token from this particular authorization header. If you see, authorization header will have this particular token now. After that, we will check all this and we will get the token after index 7. So if you see the token now, token will have just the JWT token. And here in the extract username, what we are doing, let me just go over here. Here in the extract username, we are just building this token. We are just getting the body from this token, right? It will just build it, it will parse the body, it will get the body, right? And it will return, right? And that body will have get subject. So from that subject, we are getting the username. If you see over here, we will have the username at this point of time, basically, which is admin, right? And from here, we will just extract the user details. We are getting user details from database, and we'll just validate the token now, right? Validate the token that, okay, dude, we are checking first this part and second this part. This part will be, it will again fetch the token. So if you want to check what is there inside a claim, then we can probably evaluate this expression. Let's evaluate. If you see over here, it will have this subject, it will have this issued at and expiry time, right? All these things, the things which we have added while creating the token are coming back to us, right? 1, 2, 3. And it will get expiration and we'll check if this particular guy is before that. Now this will not be before and it will be true. Now this is getting the body and this will return the result and our token will not be basically expired, right? Now if we proceed, now after that we are going to this particular controller and this controller will return us the result. Now if I change any character inside this particular guy, if I change anything and send it, then let's say what happens. So if I proceed now, and now we are extracting the claims, right? Now let me try to evaluate this. Evaluate expression and let's evaluate. JWT signature does not match locally computed signature, right? So that is basically a wrong token. Now from here only user got 403 forbidden, right? And what will happen if the token is expired? Let's say I will just add 1 minute. Let's say token will be expired in 1 minute. What will happen, right? So let me just rerun. So it is started. Now let me just send it, get a new token. And let me try to quickly get a response. So now we are getting, let's wait for 1 minute, right? We are still getting response, waiting to complete 1 minute. Now if you see 1 minute is completed and we are getting 403 forbidden, right? So that is basically your token is expired, right? That means user needs to generate a new token, right? So that is basically how you can implement JWT filter and you can add a respective utilities inside your JWT utility, right? So I will convert this back to 60 so that when I push this code, you will be able to see this particular value, right? So I will just push this code and I will add the link in description, right? So that you can clone the code and play around with it, right? So let me go back over here to our diagram, right? So what we did, we created a new JWT authentication filter. And we have added a utility. We have validated our token, right? And we have checked the expiry of the token, right? All these things we have implemented. And after that, we have added it inside a security context holder, right? So if it is present inside security context holder, your username and password authentication filter will skip it and your request will directly go to controller, right? So that was the simple implementation of your JWT authentication filter, right? Nothing big thing over here, very, very simple stuff, right? So that is how you can implement JWT authentication. And this is one-time process, right? And this is very simple stuff, right? One-time process, once you implement it, you don't need to change it, right? Very frequently. So that is how you can implement your JWT authentication. First thing you can do is implement your authenticate flow. Get the token. When the user passes the token, you need to add your JWT auth filter before your username and password authentication filter. So that is again important. In order to do that, you can add this statement, add filter before. Which filter? This filter before this filter, right? Simple stuff. JWT authentication filter before username and password authentication filter, right? So that we have added. And once we send the request with the token, we have extracted the token by validated by using this utility and added it inside this particular holder. That's it, right? So we have implemented and we have added the logic to validate the token as well. So that is basically how simply you can implement this JWT authentication, right? Very, very simple stuff. Now, if you have any question on JWT authentication implementation, let me know in the comment section. I will make sure and answer those. If you like the video, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to Code Snippet. Share this video with your friends so that they also have idea about how to implement JWT authentication. Please make sure you like, share and subscribe to Code Snippet. Your little effort of subscribing will give me enthusiasm to create more and more videos like this. That's it for this video. See you in the next video.